Hello everybody, welcome to First Attack here on the Chensor Dynasty on twitch.tv/jchensor. My name is James Chen, and this is the series of videos where I, James Chen, try to teach you as much about fighting games as possible. We've been going on for 5 episodes already. Here we are on our 6th episode, and we'll be talking all about frame advantage and delving a little bit into frames. So let's get going right away. Let's get started. And before we get into the frame data, I kind of want to recap where we've gone. So this is section 6.-2. 6.-2 for everybody over here, okay? Because we have gone through a bunch of stuff already in the past few weeks, and I want to talk about the fighting game phases flowchart that we saw way back in episode 2. I created this flowchart here that showed basically how fighting games go, right? You go from the neutral to the pressure advantage to mix-ups to combos to okazeme. When you are playing a fighting game, this in general is how you expect the flow of your match to go. You're going to start in the neutral. One player then gets advantage situation, a pressure advantage situation. They can perform a mix-up. If they succeed in that, they have the ability to land a combo, and then from there, they get an okazeme situation. Again, don't worry about the okazeme, what that means. All that's coming in a future episode, but in the past few episodes, we just talked about footsies, we talked about spaces and ranging, and attack vectors. That all covered the neutral. That is just the neutral. We have just expanded into the neutral, and finally, and by the way, just so you guys remember what neutral was all about, neutral, the 3 episodes I did, was footsies. And footsies, of course, is the philosophy, the strategy that you want to use in neutral. Basically, this is the, remember the footsies triangle between the whiff punishing, the space control, and the moving forward. This is the philosophy. This is the basis, core, fundamental strategy of how you want to play footsies in the neutral. We talked about ranges and spacing. This is how you play footsies. So footsies is what you want to do, the basis behind your strategy in neutral. Ranges and spacing is how you control that strategy, is how you implement that strategy by moving your character to the positions that you need them to be. And then finally, there's attack vectors. So attack vectors help you see the match, help you envision the match so that you understand which spacing, where the ranges are that you want to be in. It helps you envision the playing field as areas of danger. And again, if you've missed all these things, check youtube.com/UltraChenTV. All of these videos will be on there. The past few episodes were on there. Now, there's a lot of information in those 3 episodes. The First Attack episodes have been going much longer than I had planned originally. I'm trying to dial it back, so this is going to be a much shorter episode. So just to let you guys know ahead of time. Now, finally, we're moving past the neutral. We are moving past the neutral, and we are finally entering the pressure and advantage section of the flowchart. So here's the next section of the flowchart. Remember, you are going to be using all of the stuff in this previous slide, all of this stuff, footsies, ranges, and spacing, and attack vectors, to reward yourself to getting the advantage. That's the idea. One of the things I really regret doing in the ranges and spacing episode, you remember the Ryu Guile example I talked about? I talked about how, 2 characters at certain ranges will have an advantage over the other, One of the things that's going to get a little bit confusing is I'm going to be using the word advantage a lot. So I kind of regret not establishing very early on that in neutral, that is positional advantage. The advantage you gain in the footsies by being at certain ranges because one character is, just more threatening than the other character's specific ranges. That is positional advantage. What we're actually going to be talking about this time, however, is frame advantage. So this is different than the positional advantage that we were talking about beforehand. So I want to establish that early on. So, frame advantage. This is where neutral ends. By my definition, neutral is the phase of fighting games where both players are in control and have the majority of the options available to them. There's been a term that I've used in the past called neutral state, in which your character is in a situation in which they're allowed to walk, crouch, jump, attack, perform a special move, roll, slash back, sidestep, whatever it is that the fighting game has. The neutral state is where you're allowed to do that. And so when you're playing neutral, both characters have generally in control of the majority of their options. Frame advantage, however, is the situation where one character is in the neutral state. They have control of the majority of their options, but the other player does not. Okay? So again, this is a situation where one player has most of their options available and the other player, for one reason or another, has all of their options taken away from them so that they only have a few options left for themselves. This is your goal in neutral. If you remember back in the neutral episode, I said your goal was not to do damage. Your goal was to put yourself in a position of an advantage. And when I say that, I meant your goal in neutral is to put yourself in a position of frame advantage. Now, frame. I keep talking about frames all the time. I keep talking about this concept of frames, right? Well, the question really comes down to is, what is a frame? A miserable pile of secrets. But enough talk! Oops, actually, sorry about that. That was my mistake. I got kind of caught up a little bit on something else. Okay, no, the question, okay, let's go back to this. What is a frame? What is a frame? It's a miserable little pile, no. Sorry. Oops, no. Okay, let's go back. A frame, in fact, is a measurement of time. A frame is a measurement of time. In fact, this should have been a jchensor axiom. I forgot to write this down, that this is supposed to be a measurement. So always consider frames as a unit of time. The majority of modern video games output their images at 60 frames per second. If you know anything about graphics and, TV and all the settings that you have, outputting games at 60 frames per second is the common frame rate at which video games show their images. Again, you want to think of frames kind of like an animation frame. So, you've seen the flip books before, where you flip the book and the little, animation in the corner starts to play, so it looks like an animation. That's what a frame is. That's all a frame is. A frame is a single image that is displayed to you by the game console. And they occur so quickly that it gives you the illusion of movement, and it looks like a moving picture at that point. Everything shows at this frame rate. In fact, movies also play at a frame rate. Now, movies play at a slower frame rate. Interestingly enough, movies by default, I think, are at, a 24 frames per second? But that's why movies have a distinctive look. And when you watch something like a soap opera on TV, which actually runs at 60 frames per second, it looks different. And I don't know if any of you had the chance to do this, if you went to see Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit in the theater that was played at 60 frames per second, it looked more like a soap opera to you. Something about it looked more like it was just taking place in your living room. That's the difference. It's the frames per second. It actually makes a really, really big difference. But enough of that aside, most games output at 60 frames per second. And because of that, then, all of the animations that you see in fighting games are happening frame by frame. So whenever Ryu does an attack, he does first frame, second frame, third frame, and he's punching, fourth frame, fifth frame, and then he retracts his arm. And so that's the frames. And so because so many actions in fighting games occur so quickly, even less than a second, the majority of actions in fighting games occur in less than a second, we needed a good way to measure the length of so many of these actions. So we went with the most logical thing, and that is the number of frames a move takes, because that's the basis of pretty much all of fighting games at this point. Everything occurs within a certain number of frames. It is a measurement of time. So if I say this move is 13 frames long, it's like saying, oh, you know what? It takes me 13 seconds to do this. You know, it takes 20 frames for this attack to come out. It takes 20 seconds for Usain Bolt to run, you know, the 100 or that short race that he runs and he does in like 14 or 13 seconds or something. I don't remember what his world record is at this point. But, you know, that's all you want to understand, is that frames are just a measurement of time. And again, a frame is equal, that means, to 1/60th of a second, because of all the stuff that's happening in our video games is happening at 60 frames per second. Every frame is 1/60th of a second. Now, how crazy is that? It's very intimidating if you're new to fighting games when someone sits here and tells you, oh yeah, we calculate things down to 1/60th of a second. I mean, that's wild, right? Because 1/60th of a second sounds like it's completely insignificant. But if I say something takes 3 seconds long in a fighting game, that is a lifetime. If you had a move in a fighting game that took 3 seconds to do, that is an eternity. We are talking in 1/60th of a second here. And like I said, while this may seem intimidating, while this may make you see this and go, oh my God, that's way too complicated. You're doing numbers. Numbers scare me. Please stop this. I don't enjoy fighting games anymore. Don't worry. In the next few weeks, I will be going into a lot about frame data, and I'll be going a lot into frame numbers and trying to explain them in such a way to take away the intimidation, to take away the confusion. I'm going to give you the concepts of what frame data tells you, to try my best to make it so that the numbers are less significant to you, so that the numbers don't matter as much as the concepts of what the numbers are trying to tell you. If I say something is 2 frames, if it gives you a 2-frame advantage, you won't have to worry what the 2 means. All you care about is that I said this gives you an advantage. That's the kind of thing that I'm going to be planning to do in the next coming weeks as I continue talking about frame advantage. So why is this called frame advantage then? Why are we calling this frame advantage? Why is this important? Why is frame advantage the next phase of this flowchart? So again, pressure and frame advantage. I should change that to say pressure and frame advantage to distinguish it from positional advantage. So why is it called frame advantage? Because frame advantage, by definition, means that you can move for a certain amount of time, aka frames. You see the arrows pointing at the frames, before the opponent can. Frame advantage means your opponent is stuck and you are not. So you can perform actions, and the opponent's actions have been reduced to a very, very limited amount of options. And in some games, almost no options at all. That you're forced to have to deal with this kind of mix-up pressure. This is why it's pressure and advantage, because now, as the character who has extra time to do whatever they want to the opponent, they have the ability to enforce their pressure on the opponent. They have the ability to enforce a mix-up on the opponent. And again, when I talk about frame advantage, it sounds really confusing, but let's say I just changed the word frame to time. If I said, okay, it's called time advantage, so after this happens, your opponent has a time advantage over you, then it starts to make more sense, right? As soon as I say that, it clears up in your head. Oh, I get it. The opponent has the ability to do something before I do. They have a head start. I once talked about frame advantage as a race. That if you have frame advantage, you are able to start running in the race before the opponent. You get a head start against your opponent. That is what it means by a frame advantage. And in almost anything, a head start is such an advantage because the person who has the head start has a period of time where they can set up a bunch of stuff that the other person can't do. And so you always want to give yourself as many head starts as possible in fighting games. And again, frame advantage is small. We already talked about this in the last one. A frame is equal to 1/60th of a second. Frame advantage is significant at any amount. And again, if I talked about 3 seconds, that's 180 frames. That's almost unheard of. If you can ever have some sort of 180 frames advantage over your opponent, something is wrong, okay? Most likely, the opponent is dizzy. If you've seen this in fighting game mechanics where a character gets knocked dizzy and they literally can't do anything. But you aren't going to see that very much. In fact, if you're already at 20 frames advantage, that's already a gigantic advantage. 1/3 of a second is a huge and almost unheard of advantage in most fighting games. And in fact, if you get to games like Street Fighter V, like Tekken 7, like Mortal Kombat 11, even having a 1 frame advantage, 1/60th of a second, even having a 1 frame advantage is enough to be significant in situations. And again, this sounds intimidating. Do I really need to learn everything down to the 60th of a second? Again, no, you don't. As I said, I'm going to try my best to teach this in such a way that the concepts that these numbers create, that the situations that these numbers create are what I'm going to get you to focus on rather than the actual numbers. So again, even though you see this, and I'm not trying to scare people, I'm not trying to intimidate people by saying, oh my gosh, 1 frame is so significant. Like, I'm not trying to scare people, but I'm just trying to let you know in general the kind of time frame we're talking about. I'm trying to give you the proper scope, the relative concept of here, so you can understand what we're talking about here.